Welcome back to Silent Fears, the shadowy realm where our fearless road warriors gather. Tonight, we delve into the cursed archives of America's most haunted highways. Each mile marked by terror, each story waiting to consume you. These 11 terrifying road encounters will make you question every late-night drive. If you dare to travel these dark roads with us, prove your courage by hitting that like button. We're chasing 500 brave souls tonight. And if you're new here, subscribe to join the Silent Fears Brotherhood. Because once you witness what lurks on America's highways, you'll never drive alone again. Are you prepared to discover the terror that waits in the darkness? Then buckle up and turn off your lights. This horrifying journey starts now. Let's move to our first story. My name is Heidi, and I'm a 34-year-old marketing executive from San Francisco. What I'm about to tell you happened 3 years ago in October 2019, and I still get chills thinking about it. I was driving from Reno to Salt Lake City for a client meeting, taking Interstate 80 through the Nevada desert. It was supposed to be a straightforward 6-hour drive, but what happened that night changed how I think about the open road forever. I left Reno around 9 p.m. after wrapping up some last-minute work at my hotel. The plan was to drive through the night and arrive in Salt Lake City early morning, grab some coffee, and be fresh for my 10 a.m. presentation. My Honda Accord had been reliable for 3 years, and I'd made this drive twice before without any issues. The radio had been acting up lately, cutting in and out. So I was relying on my phone's playlist to keep me company through the long desert stretch. Everything was normal as I passed through Fernley and entered what locals call the 40-mile desert, that barren stretch between Fernley and Winnemucca. It's called that because during the California Gold Rush, travelers had to endure 40 miles without usable water crossing this valley. Even now, it feels like you're driving through the middle of nowhere. The landscape is just endless sagebrush and distant mountains under a blanket of stars. Around 11:30 p.m., about 20 miles east of Winnemucca, near mile marker 333, my headlights caught something unusual on the shoulder. There was an elderly woman in a white dress just standing there with her thumb out. Now, I'm normally very cautious about picking up hitchhikers, especially in the middle of nowhere at night. But something about her seemed different. She looked so frail and vulnerable, and the temperature was dropping fast. I couldn't just leave an elderly woman stranded in the desert. I pulled over and rolled down my passenger window. She approached slowly, and I got my first good look at her. She appeared to be in her 70s, with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun. Her white dress looked like something from decades ago. Not vintage or retro, but genuinely old. What struck me most were her eyes. They were incredibly sad, like she'd seen terrible things. "Thank you so much for stopping, dear," she said in a soft, gentle voice. "I've been waiting here for quite some time." Her manner of speaking was formal, old-fashioned. I unlocked the doors, and she climbed into the passenger seat. She moved carefully, like her joints ached. And when she settled in, I noticed she didn't buckle her seatbelt. I was about to mention it when she spoke again. "I'm heading toward Battle Mountain," she said. "My grandson lives there. There's been some trouble, and I need to see him." Battle Mountain was about 80 miles ahead on I-80, so it was right on my route. I told her it was no problem and pulled back onto the highway. For the first few miles, we rode in comfortable silence. Then she started talking, and what she told me still haunts me today. She began mentioning names: Aisha Williams, Rome Peterson, Damon Rodriguez. People who had gone missing along this stretch of highway over the years. She spoke about them like she knew them personally, describing their cars, what they were wearing, even their last thoughts before they disappeared. Aisha was wearing a blue sweater when her car broke down here in 2003, she said matter-of-factly. She was only 22, going to visit her sister in Elko. She never made it. Then she turned to look at me with those sad eyes. Rome was different. He wasn't alone when his truck was found empty near the rest stop. His wife was with him. They found her purse, but never found them. I felt a chill run down my spine. These weren't stories you'd hear on the news or read about online. The details were too specific, too personal. I tried to convince myself she was just someone who paid close attention to local missing person cases, maybe a retired police officer or journalist. But deep down, something felt very wrong. As we approached the Flying J truck stop near Winnemucca, she continued her disturbing recollections. The worst was Reese Sullivan in 1987. He was just 19, driving home from college for Christmas break. They found his car 3 days later with the engine still running and his wallet on the dashboard. He'd written a letter to his parents that they never found with the car. It was in his back pocket when they discovered him 6 months later in a ravine 40 miles away. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. I needed gas and a break from this conversation, so I decided to stop at the Flying J. I need to fill up, I told her. Do you want anything from inside? She shook her head. I'll wait here, dear. I don't get around as well as I used to. I pulled up to pump number 7, and as I got out, I made sure to lock the car. It was an automatic habit. But something about her stories was making me paranoid. Inside the truck stop, the fluorescent lights felt harsh after the darkness of the highway. The young clerk behind the counter looked tired, probably pulling a night shift. I grabbed a coffee and some snacks, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling the old woman's stories had given me. Maybe she was just lonely and wanted to talk. Maybe she'd read about these cases in old newspapers. But when I went to pay, something the clerk said made my blood freeze. Rough night to be out there alone, he said, nodding toward the pumps. Especially with all the weird stuff that happens on this stretch. Weird stuff? I asked. He leaned forward conspiratorially. Missing people mostly. Lots of cars found empty over the years. My uncle's been a state trooper here for 20 years, and he says there's something about the area between here and Battle Mountain. People just vanish. I felt sick to my stomach. I paid quickly and hurried back to my car, coffee in hand. But when I got to pump 7, my heart nearly stopped. The passenger seat was empty. The car was still locked exactly as I'd left it. But the old woman was gone. I looked around frantically. The truck stop was well lit, and I could see clearly in all directions. There were only 2 other vehicles, a big rig and a pickup truck, and no sign of the woman anywhere. She couldn't have just disappeared into thin air. But she had. I went back inside and asked the clerk if he'd seen an elderly woman in a white dress. He looked at me strangely. Ma'am, you've been alone this whole time. I watched you pull up by yourself. That's impossible, I insisted. She was in my passenger seat. She's been riding with me for over an hour. The clerk's expression changed from confusion to something like fear. He called over an older employee, a woman who'd apparently been working there for years. When I described the woman to her, her face went pale. Honey, she said quietly, you just described Eleanor Whitman. She died in a car accident right here at mile marker 333 in 2004. Her car hit black ice and rolled over. They say she was wearing a white dress. She'd been to her granddaughter's wedding in Reno and was driving home to Battle Mountain when it happened. I felt the world spinning around me. That's impossible. She was just in my car. She told me about missing persons, about people who disappeared along this highway. The older woman nodded grimly. That sounds like Eleanor. Her grandson said she always worried about travelers on this stretch. After her accident, people started reporting seeing her, always trying to warn them about the dangerous areas, the places where people have gone missing. I stumbled back to my car in a daze. The passenger seat still smelled faintly of old perfume, and when I looked closer, I could see the indentation where someone had been sitting. On the dashboard, I found something that made me nearly pass out. A small, handwritten note in elegant script. Be careful near Battle Mountain Rest Area. Watch for the blue pickup truck, Eleanor. I drove the rest of the way to Salt Lake City in terrified silence, constantly checking my mirrors and avoiding the rest areas. When I finally reached my hotel at dawn, I immediately Googled Eleanor Whitman. Everything the truck stop employee had said was true. She died in 2004, just 15 years before my encounter, at the exact spot where I'd picked her up. But the most chilling part came when I researched the missing persons she'd mentioned. Every single name, every detail she'd given me was accurate. Aisha Williams, Rome Peterson and his wife, Damon Rodriguez, Reese Sullivan, all real people who had vanished along that stretch of highway, just as she'd described. I've driven through Nevada several times since then, but never at night, and never alone. I always stop at that Flying J in Winnemucca, and I always ask the employees if anyone else has reported seeing Eleanor. They just nod sadly and tell me it happens a few times a year, usually to solo travelers driving through in the dark. The note she left is still in my wallet. Sometimes I wonder if she saved my life that night by warning me about the blue pickup truck. I'll never know for sure, but I do know this. Eleanor Whitman is still out there on that lonely stretch of I-80, still trying to protect travelers from meeting the same fate as those missing persons she knew so much about. And if you ever find yourself driving through the Nevada desert late at night and see an elderly woman in white by the side of the road, maybe you should listen to what she has to say. She might be trying to save your life. Let's move to our second story. My name is Esteban, and I'm a 28-year-old construction worker from Pittsburgh. What happened to me in the summer of 2021 still keeps me awake at night, and I've never told anyone the complete truth about what I experienced in the backwoods of West Virginia. I thought I was just taking a wrong turn. But what I discovered that night was something far more sinister than getting lost. I was heading down to Virginia for a camping trip with some buddies from work. We'd planned to meet at a campground near the Jefferson National Forest, and I was running late because of a job that went over schedule. It was already getting dark when I finally left Pittsburgh around 8 p.m. on a Friday night in July. I figured I'd drive through the night and meet up with everyone Saturday morning. Everything was going fine until I hit Braxton County around 11:30 p.m. I was following my GPS, taking Interstate 79 south toward Beckley, when I needed to stop for gas and food. The GPS directed me to take exit 67 near Sutton. But instead of finding the truck stop I was looking for, I somehow ended up on a series of increasingly narrow back roads. My phone kept losing signal, which wasn't unusual in that part of West Virginia. But what started bothering me was how the road signs seemed to be getting older and more weathered the further I drove. I should have turned around when I first noticed the change. But I was stubborn and figured the road would eventually connect back to a main highway. That's when I found myself on what looked like County Route 12. Though the sign was so faded and bullet-riddled, I couldn't be sure. The road was barely wide enough for my F-150, and the trees on both sides created a tunnel of darkness that my headlights could barely penetrate. after about 20 minutes of driving on this godforsaken road, I came across what looked like a small settlement. I'm talking maybe 8 or 10 buildings total, ramshackle houses, a few trailers, and what might have been a general store at one time. There were no street lights, no power lines that I could see, and the only illumination came from a few flickering oil lamps, maybe a generator-powered light here and there. It looked like something out of the 1800s, not 2021. I slowed down, trying to figure out if this place was even inhabited, when I noticed people starting to emerge from the buildings. At first, I thought they were coming out to help a lost traveler. But something about the way they moved made my skin crawl. They were walking deliberately toward my truck, and even in the dim light, I could see they were carrying things, tools, maybe weapons. My construction background meant I could recognize the silhouette of hammers, crowbars, and other implements that had no business being in the hands of people approaching a stranger's vehicle at midnight. I stopped the truck, not sure what else to do. The largest man in the group, someone who looked like he could have been the leader, approached my driver's side window. He was maybe 60 years old, with long gray hair and a beard that hadn't been trimmed in months. His clothes looked like they'd been patched and repatched so many times, I couldn't tell what they'd originally been. When he smiled, I could see he was missing most of his teeth. "You lost, boy?" he asked in a thick Appalachian accent. His voice was friendly enough, but there was something underneath it that made every instinct I had scream danger. "This here's private property. Ain't supposed to be no outsiders coming through without permission." I tried to explain that I'd gotten turned around, that I was just trying to get back to the interstate. But as I was talking, I noticed more people gathering around my truck. Women, children, elderly folks, maybe 20 people total, all staring at me with expressions I couldn't quite read. Some looked curious, others seemed hostile, but all of them had this intensity that made me extremely uncomfortable. "Well now," the old man continued, "since you're here, might as well make yourself useful. We got a little ceremony tonight, and we could use an extra pair of hands." The way he said ceremony made my blood run cold. "Course, once you participate, you'll be part of the family. Can't have you leaving and telling folks about our business." That's when I noticed that several of the men had positioned themselves behind my truck. Even if I wanted to back out of there, they were blocking my exit. I was trapped, surrounded by people who clearly didn't want me to leave, in a place that didn't seem to exist on any map. "What kind of ceremony?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. The old man's grin got wider, and he gestured toward what looked like a large fire pit in the center of the settlement. I hadn't noticed it before because it wasn't lit. But now I could see it was surrounded by wooden posts driven into the ground. "Old traditions," he said cryptically. "Ways of ensuring the land stays fertile, the hunting stays good. Your kind wouldn't understand, but you'll learn. Everyone who stays learns eventually." I realized I had two choices: play along and hope I could find an opportunity to escape, or try to ram my way out of there and hope my truck could handle whatever they threw at it. Given that I was outnumbered at least 20 to 1, I decided to bide my time. "Sure," I said, trying to sound agreeable. "What do you need me to do?" The relief on their faces was immediate, but it wasn't the kind of relief that made me feel better. It was the relief of predators who'd successfully trapped their prey. They directed me to park my truck near one of the buildings and follow them to the fire pit. As we walked, I could see more details of the settlement that made my situation even more terrifying. There were animal bones scattered around, not just the remains of hunting, but arranged in deliberate patterns. Some of the buildings had symbols carved into their walls that looked like they might have been done with knives or other sharp tools. And hanging from several of the trees were things I didn't want to look at too closely, but which definitely weren't decorations. The ceremony, if that's what you want to call it, was unlike anything I'd ever imagined. They lit the fire pit, and the flames revealed that the wooden posts around it weren't just decorative. They had ropes attached to them, and stains on the ground that looked suspiciously dark in the firelight. The old man started chanting in what might have been English, but was so heavily accented and archaic that I couldn't understand most of it. What I could understand was that they expected me to participate in something that would bind me to the land and make me one with the family. Other participants started bringing out items. Some looked like personal belongings that clearly hadn't belonged to anyone in that settlement. A watch, a cell phone, car keys, a woman's purse. My construction-trained eye immediately recognized these as things that had probably belonged to other travelers who'd gotten lost and ended up here. That's when I knew I had to get out of there. Ceremony or no ceremony. I started backing away slowly, trying to reach the edge of the firelight without anyone noticing. But the old man's eyes found me immediately. "Now, boy, where you think you're going?" he asked, and his friendly tone was completely gone. "We ain't finished with the welcoming yet." I ran. I'm not proud of it, but I ran as fast as I'd ever run in my life. Behind me I could hear shouting, cursing, and the sound of people crashing through the underbrush in pursuit. My truck was maybe 100 yards away, but it felt like a mile. I could hear them gaining on me, and I knew that if they caught me, I wasn't going to be leaving that place. I reached my F-150 just as the first of them broke through the tree line behind me. I'd left the keys in the ignition, stupid but lucky, and I gunned the engine without even bothering to close my door properly. The truck lurched forward, and I felt a thud as someone tried to jump onto the tailgate. I swerved hard to the left, then the right, and heard them fall off with a yell of pain. The next 20 minutes were a nightmare of narrow roads, overhanging branches scraping my roof, and the constant fear that I'd taken another wrong turn and was driving deeper into their territory instead of out of it. But eventually, miraculously, I saw the glow of interstate lights ahead. I'd never been so happy to see a pilot truck stop in my life. I didn't stop driving until I reached Charleston, about 2 hours away. I sat in a Walmart parking lot until sunrise, checking my truck for damage and trying to process what had happened. There were scratches on the tailgate where whoever had tried to jump on had scraped it with their fingernails or tools. There was also a piece of fabric caught on my rear bumper. Rough, homespun cloth that definitely hadn't come from any store. I never made it to that camping trip. Instead, I drove straight back to Pittsburgh and didn't speak to anyone about what happened for weeks. When I finally tried to research the area where I'd gotten lost, I couldn't find any record of a settlement on County Route 12 in Braxton County. According to every map and database I could access, that road doesn't even exist. But I know what I saw. I know what almost happened to me in that place that officially doesn't exist. And I know that somewhere in the backwoods of West Virginia, there's a group of people living by rules and traditions that have nothing to do with the modern world, and everything to do with making sure that travelers who stumble into their territory never leave to tell anyone what they've found. I've driven through West Virginia since then, but only on major highways, and never alone. Because I know that just off the beaten path, in places that don't show up on any GPS, there are people waiting for the next lost traveler to help them with their ceremonies. And I have no intention of ever being that traveler again. Let's move to our third story. My name is Julieta, and I'm a 42-year-old divorced mother from Sacramento. What I'm about to tell you happened in March 2020, right at the beginning of the pandemic, when everything felt uncertain and scary already. I was moving to Portland with my 8-year-old daughter Thea to start fresh after my divorce. But what should have been a hopeful new beginning turned into the most terrifying night of my life on Highway 101 along the Oregon coast. I'd been planning this move for months. The divorce had been finalized in February, and I'd landed a good job at a marketing firm in Portland. My ex-husband was keeping the house in Sacramento, so I packed everything I could fit into my Toyota Camry and planned to drive up the scenic coastal route as a way to decompress and show Thea some beautiful scenery before we started our new life. Looking back, taking the coastal route instead of I-5 might have been the worst decision I ever made. We left Sacramento around noon on a Saturday, planning to take our time and maybe stop overnight somewhere along the coast. Thea was excited about the move. She'd always been resilient and saw it as an adventure. We stopped for lunch in Eureka, California, and then continued north into Oregon. The weather was overcast but not rainy, typical for the Oregon coast in March. Traffic was light, probably because of the early pandemic restrictions that were just starting to take effect. Everything seemed normal until we reached the area near Bandon around 3 p.m. That's when I first noticed the dark blue pickup truck in my rearview mirror. It wasn't unusual to see the same vehicle on a long stretch of highway, but something about this truck caught my attention. Maybe it was the way it seemed to maintain the exact same distance behind me, or how it never tried to pass, even when we hit slower traffic. I dismissed it as paranoia. I was still jumpy from the stress of the divorce and the move. But as we continued north through Coos Bay and Florence, the truck stayed with us. I started paying more attention to it, and what I noticed made my stomach clench with anxiety. Whenever I sped up, it sped up. When I slowed down, it slowed down. When I changed lanes, it changed lanes a few seconds later. This wasn't coincidence. Someone was deliberately following us. By the time we reached the Driftwood State Park rest area near Waldport around 5 p.m., I was genuinely frightened. The truck had been behind us for over 2 hours, maintaining that same eerie distance. I decided to pull into the rest area to see what would happen. If it was just coincidence, the truck would continue north. If I was being followed, it would stop too. I pulled into a parking spot near the restrooms, and my worst fears were confirmed. The blue pickup pulled into the rest area about 30 seconds after me, parking several spaces away, but with a clear view of my car. I could see the driver, a middle-aged man in a baseball cap. But I couldn't make out his face clearly. He didn't get out of his truck, just sat there watching us. "Mommy, why isn't that man getting out?" Thea asked, and I realized she'd noticed him too. I told her we were just taking a quick break and tried to keep my voice calm, but inside I was panicking. I considered calling 911, but what would I tell them? A man was parked legally in a public rest area? I had no proof he was actually following us. I decided to test my theory. After about 10 minutes, I loaded Thea back into the car and pulled out of the rest area, back onto Highway 101 northbound. Sure enough, within a minute, the blue pickup was back on the highway behind me. My hands were shaking as I gripped the steering wheel, trying to figure out what to do. The next hour was a nightmare of psychological torture. No matter what I did, the truck stayed with me. I tried speeding up to 70 miles per hour. He matched my speed. I slowed down to 45 miles per hour. He slowed down too. I took the exit for the Boiler Bay State Park rest area near Depot Bay, and he followed me off the highway. When I immediately got back on the highway without stopping, he did the same thing. By this point, Thea was getting scared too. "Mommy, is that man following us?" she asked, and I couldn't lie to her anymore. I told her that yes, I thought he might be, but that we were going to be okay, and I had a plan. The truth was, I didn't have a plan. I was a single mother being stalked by a stranger on a remote highway with my young daughter in the car, and I felt completely helpless. As we approached Lincoln City around 7 p.m., I was getting desperate. It would be dark soon, and I couldn't drive all night with this maniac following us. That's when I remembered something my divorce attorney had told me about stalking laws in Oregon. If someone follows you to multiple locations, it constitutes stalking, which is a crime. I needed to document what was happening. At the next rest area, Nescoin State Park, I pulled out my phone and started recording as I pulled into the parking area. Sure enough, the blue pickup followed me in and parked where the driver could watch us. This time, I got a better look at him through my phone's camera. He was probably in his 50s, wearing a red baseball cap and a dark jacket. He had a beard and appeared to be alone in the truck. I called 911 from the rest area and explained the situation to the dispatcher. She was sympathetic, but said that since the man hadn't actually threatened us or approached our vehicle, the best she could do was have a patrol car meet us somewhere along our route. The problem was, the nearest patrol car was over an hour away, and I couldn't just sit in that rest area with this guy watching us for an hour. The dispatcher suggested I drive to a populated area, a hotel, restaurant, or gas station, where there would be witnesses and possibly security cameras. She stayed on the line with me as I got back on Highway 101, the blue pickup once again falling, in behind us. I told Thea to keep her head down and not look back at the truck, even though I could see it clearly in all three of my mirrors. We reached Tillamook around 8:30 p.m., and I pulled into a well-lit gas station right off the highway. It was one of those travel centers with a restaurant and a convenience store, and there were plenty of other people around. I felt safer immediately. But my relief was short-lived. The blue pickup didn't follow us into the gas station. Instead, it pulled into a parking lot across the street where the driver could still watch us. I filled up my gas tank even though I didn't need to, bought snacks and drinks I didn't want, and used the restroom, all while keeping an eye on the truck across the street. The 911 dispatcher was still on the phone with me, and she confirmed that a patrol car was finally en route to our location. But as we waited, something even more terrifying happened. The man got out of his truck. For the first time in over 5 hours, I got a full look at the person who'd been stalking us. He was tall, maybe 6 feet, and had that weathered look of someone who spent a lot of time outdoors. But what scared me most was how calm and confident he appeared. This wasn't some impulsive stalker. This felt planned, methodical. He walked across the street toward the gas station, and I grabbed Thea's hand and headed for the main building where there were more people. But instead of following us inside, he walked over to my car. I watched in horror through the window as he pulled out his phone and started taking pictures of my license plate, my car, even the child's car seat in the back. That's when I lost it. I ran outside screaming at him to get away from my car, to leave us alone. Several other customers turned to look, and the gas station attendant came out to see what was happening. The man looked at me with his cold, calculating smile and said, "Nice car. Good for road trips." Then he walked back across the street to his truck like nothing had happened. The state trooper arrived about 20 minutes later, just as I was giving a statement to the gas station manager who'd witnessed the whole thing. The trooper took my complaint seriously, especially when I showed him the video I'd taken at the rest area and told him about the 5-hour pursuit. He ran the license plate on the blue pickup. But when he went across the street to question the driver, the truck was gone. The trooper followed us for the rest of our drive to Portland, which took another 2 hours. I was so grateful for that escort. It was the first time since Bandon that I felt truly safe. We didn't see the blue pickup again that night, and I started to hope that maybe the police intervention had scared him off. But when I woke up the next morning at our hotel in Portland, I found something that made me realize the nightmare wasn't over. There was a note tucked under the windshield wiper of my car. It was written in block letters on plain white paper, and it said, "Welcome to Oregon. Hope you enjoy your new home. You'll be seeing me around. A friend." The hotel security cameras had been down for maintenance the night before, so there was no footage of who had left the note. The Portland police took it as evidence and opened a stalking case, but without more information about the man or his vehicle, there wasn't much they could do except advise me to be vigilant and report any further contact. I never saw the blue pickup truck again, and I never got any more notes. But for months afterward, I was constantly looking over my shoulder, checking my mirrors, varying my route to work and Thea's school. Every blue truck I saw made my heart race. Every unexpected noise outside our apartment sent me into a panic. The stalking protection order I filed was granted, even though we didn't have the man's name or address. The judge said the pattern of behavior and the threatening note were enough to justify the protection, and it would apply to anyone matching the description I'd given. It was some comfort, but not much when the person you're afraid of is a complete stranger who could be anywhere. It's been over 4 years now, and we've built a good life in Portland. Thea loves her school. I've been promoted twice at work, and we've made some great friends. But I still take I-5 when we travel south to visit family in California. I can't bring myself to drive Highway 101 again, especially not with Thea in the car. Some roads hold too many bad memories, and some strangers leave scars that never quite heal. The scariest part isn't that someone followed us for 5 hours that day. It's that he's still out there somewhere, possibly doing the same thing to other travelers, other families. Sometimes I wonder if I should have tried harder to get his license plate number, or if I should have done something different. But mostly, I'm just grateful that we made it to Portland safely, and that whoever he was, he decided to leave us alone after that first night. Not everyone who gets stalked on a lonely highway is that lucky. Let's move to our fourth story. My name is Robert, and I'm a 55-year-old retiree from Phoenix, Arizona. What happened to me in August 2018 along Arizona State Route 85 through the Sonoran Desert changed everything I thought I knew about survival, trust, and the things that hunt travelers in the most remote corners of our country. I was 3 months into retirement after 30 years as an electrician, and I'd finally bought the RV I'd been dreaming about since my 20s. A 2015 Winnebago Vista that I got for a steal from a neighbor who was downsizing after his wife passed away. The plan was simple. Take a solo trip from Phoenix down to Yuma, then loop back through some of the most beautiful and isolated desert country in Arizona. I'd grown up in this state, spent decades working construction jobs from Flagstaff to Tucson. But I'd never really had the time to just drive through the desert and appreciate it. My wife had passed 2 years earlier from cancer, and this trip felt like a way to reconnect with the landscape that had shaped my entire life. I left Phoenix on a Tuesday morning in mid-August, when the temperature was already climbing toward 110 degrees by 9 a.m. The heat doesn't bother me like it does transplants from back east. I've learned to respect it, prepare for it, but not fear it. I had 40 gallons of water stored in various containers throughout the RV, extra food, emergency tools, a CB radio, and my grandfather's .38 revolver that I'd inherited, but never had reason to use. The route I'd planned would take me south on I-10 to Buckeye, then southwest on Route 85 toward Gila Bend and eventually Yuma. Everything went perfectly for the first day and a half. I stopped overnight at a campground near Gila Bend, chatted with some other RV travelers, and woke up Wednesday morning feeling more relaxed than I had in years. The second leg of the trip was supposed to be the most scenic. Route 85 south through the heart of the Sonoran Desert, past the Barry M. Goldwater Air Force Range, through country that looks almost exactly like it did when the Spanish explorers first saw it centuries ago. It was about 2 p.m. Wednesday afternoon, somewhere between Gila Bend and Idaho, when the Winnebago's engine started making a noise I'd never heard before. A grinding, clicking sound that seemed to come from deep in the transmission. I pulled over immediately, popped the hood, and spent 20 minutes checking everything I could think of. The oil levels looked fine, the belts were tight, and the temperature gauge was normal. But when I tried to restart the engine, it turned over once and died completely. I was parked on the shoulder of a 2-lane highway in the middle of nowhere, with the nearest town at least 30 miles in either direction. My CB radio wasn't picking up any chatter, and my cell phone showed no signal bars. The sun was beating down mercilessly, and even though I had plenty of water and supplies, I knew that being stranded in the desert in August was potentially deadly if I couldn't get help soon. That's when I saw the dust cloud approaching from the north, a vehicle coming fast down Route 85. I stepped out of the RV and waved my arms, grateful that someone was coming along this isolated stretch of road. As the vehicle got closer, I could see it was a battered pickup truck, probably 20 years old, with 2 figures in the cab. The truck slowed down and pulled over about 50 feet behind my RV. 2 men got out, one middle-aged, maybe 45, with a baseball cap and work clothes, and another who looked younger, maybe 30, wearing a dirty tank top and jeans. They both looked like they'd been working outdoors for years, the kind of weathered, sun-beaten appearance you see on ranch hands and construction workers throughout Arizona. "Having some trouble?" the older man called out as they walked toward me. His voice was friendly enough, but something about the way they both surveyed my RV, looking at the license plates, peering through the windows, made me slightly uncomfortable. I explained about the engine trouble and asked if they had a cell phone or knew where the nearest service station might be. The younger man walked around to the front of my RV and looked under the hood while the older one continued talking to me. "Cell phones don't work out here," he said. "Nearest mechanic is probably in Ajo, but he might not be able to get out here until tomorrow or the day after. Desert breakdown is serious business, especially this time of year." He glanced at his companion, who was now looking through the driver's side window of my RV. "Tell you what, though, we know these roads pretty well. We could probably tow you to a better spot, maybe somewhere with some shade where you could wait more comfortably." Something in his tone made me hesitate. Maybe it was 30 years of dealing with contractors and subcontractors, learning to read people quickly, but I was getting a bad feeling about these two. The younger man had moved to the back of the RV and was testing the rear door handle, which I'd locked before getting out. "That's okay," I said, trying to keep my voice casual. "I've got plenty of supplies. I'll just wait here for another vehicle to come by, maybe get a ride to town to call for help." The older man's expression changed slightly. The friendly smile stayed in place, but his eyes went cold. "Thing is, mister, this road doesn't get much traffic, especially not this time of day. You might be waiting out here all night, maybe longer." He nodded toward his partner, who was now walking back toward their truck. "We're offering to help. Wouldn't want anything bad to happen to a fellow traveler." That's when I noticed the younger man was pulling something out of the truck bed, a length of chain and what looked like a crowbar. My grandfather's voice echoed in my head from 30 years earlier. Robert, if your gut tells you something's wrong, listen to it. Better to be wrong and safe than right and dead. I appreciate the offer, I said, backing slowly toward the RV's driver door. But I think I'll wait for official help. Highway patrol, maybe, or a tow truck. The older man took a step closer. Highway patrol doesn't come through here very often. And like I said, you might be waiting a long time. His partner had moved to the passenger side of my RV and was now looking through those windows. We're trying to be good Samaritans here. Help a fellow out. I made a decision. Thanks, but no thanks. I'll be fine. I opened the RV door and started to climb in, but the older man moved quickly, grabbing my arm. Now hold on there, he said, and all pretense of friendliness was gone from his voice. We've driven out of our way to help you. Least you could do is show some gratitude. His grip tightened on my arm. Maybe let us take a look inside that fancy RV, see if you've got anything we could trade for our assistance. That's when I knew I was in serious trouble. These weren't good Samaritans. They were predators who'd found what they thought was easy prey. A lone retiree, stranded in the desert, with an RV full of valuable supplies and probably cash. I jerked my arm free and dove into the driver's seat, slamming the door and hitting the lock button. Through the windshield, I could see both men running toward the front of the RV. The younger one had the crowbar in his hand. "Open the door, old man," the older one shouted, pounding on the driver's side window. "We're just trying to help." I turned the ignition key, praying that whatever had killed the engine earlier might have been temporary. Nothing. I tried again and again, while they continued pounding on the windows and trying the door handles. The younger man had moved to the back of the RV and was working on the rear door with a crowbar. On the fourth try, miraculously, the engine turned over and caught. I didn't question it. I threw the transmission into drive and floored the accelerator. The RV lurched forward, and I heard the older man curse as he jumped out of the way. In my side mirror, I could see them running back to their truck. I had maybe a 30-second head start. But the Winnebago wasn't built for speed, especially not on a desert highway. I pushed it as hard as I dared, watching the speedometer climb to 75, then 80 miles per hour. Behind me, their pickup was gaining fast. These guys knew these roads, and their truck was a lot more maneuverable than my RV. I realized they were probably planning to force me off the road, disable my vehicle completely, and then take their time going through my belongings. In the middle of the desert, with no witnesses and no cell service, they could do whatever they wanted. That's when I remembered something from my construction days. There was a Border Patrol checkpoint about 20 miles south on Route 85, just north of the Mexican border. If I could make it that far, I'd be safe. Those guys weren't going to try anything, with federal agents around. For the next 15 minutes, it was the most terrifying chase of my life. The pickup stayed right behind me, sometimes pulling alongside and trying to force me off the road. I could see the younger man in the passenger seat, and he was holding what looked like a hunting rifle. They were serious about this, willing to use violence to get what they wanted. My CB radio suddenly crackled to life. "RV on Route 85 southbound. This is Border Patrol Station 7. We can see your situation. Continue south to our checkpoint. We have agents en route to your location." I nearly cried with relief. Someone had seen what was happening, probably through surveillance cameras or aircraft that monitored this area near the border. I keyed the CB mic. This is the RV. Two men in a pickup truck have been chasing me for the last 20 miles. They tried to rob me when I broke down. Copy that. Continue south. Maintain your current speed. Do not stop for any reason. In my mirror, I could see the pickup suddenly slowing down, falling back. They'd heard the CB transmission and knew their game was over. By the time I reached the Border Patrol checkpoint 5 minutes later, they were nowhere to be seen. The agents took my statement, examined the scratches and dents on my RV where the men had tried to force their way in, and told me this wasn't the first incident of its kind. Apparently, there had been several reports over the past year of travelers being robbed or worse on the remote stretches of desert highway between Gila Bend and the Mexican border. You were lucky, one of the agents told me. These roads can be dangerous, especially for solo travelers with nice vehicles. Word gets around about who's carrying what, and some people see opportunity instead of fellow human beings. They escorted me to Ajo, where a mechanic discovered that someone had tampered with my RV's engine, loosened the battery cables just enough to cause an intermittent connection. The breakdown hadn't been mechanical failure at all. It had been sabotage, probably done while I was sleeping at the campground in Gila Bend the night before. I never finished that solo desert trip. Instead, I drove straight home to Phoenix and sold the RV 2 weeks later. Some people are built for solitary adventures on remote highways. But after what happened on Route 85, I realized I'm not one of them. The desert is beautiful, but it's also unforgiving, not just because of the heat and isolation, but because of the predators, both animal and human, who know how to use that isolation to their advantage. Now when I want to see the desert, I take day trips on busy highways, or I go with friends. I learned that retirement dreams sometimes have to adjust to reality, and that sometimes the most dangerous thing about a remote highway isn't mechanical failure or getting lost. It's the other people who choose to travel those roads with very different intentions than yours. Let's move to our fifth story. My name is Ashley, and I'm a 23-year-old college student from St. Louis, Missouri, who will never look at a roadside diner the same way again. You see, during spring break 2022, I was on my way to Boulder, Colorado, to meet up with some old friends. It was supposed to be an easy solo drive. Just me, my ancient Nissan Sentra, playlists to keep me awake, an overnight stop at the halfway mark. The interstates felt safe, and I had grown up doing road trips with my parents all the time. But by the end of that night, the world seemed unsteady, as if reality itself could peel apart at the edges when no one else is watching. I hit the road around 5 p.m., planning to split the drive in two and crash at a cheap motel near Joplin. The highways out of St. Louis were busy with other college kids, families, truckers, and the fading haze of city lights in my rear view made me feel small but adventurous. Somewhere after midnight, west of Springfield on Interstate 44, my stomach started growling, and my fuel light blinked to life. There's something especially lonely about rural highways after dark. The hum of tires, headlights slicing long shadows, and the occasional cluster of out-of-the-way businesses that promise coffee, warmth, and a break from white line fever. When the neon glow of a sign reading Eve's 24-hour diner and gas appeared at exit 72, I almost thought it was a mirage. The parking lot was empty except for one battered pickup and a pair of big rigs out back. I pulled under the flickering lights and shut off my engine, every muscle aching as I stepped outside into cold that bit, even through my hoodie. I topped up the tank, swiped my card at the old pump, and locked my car, a habit my mother drilled into me. It was exactly 2:17 a.m. The glowing clock behind the counter stuck on those numbers for the entire visit. Inside, the place was out of a memory. Red vinyl booths, a long counter, a pie case filled with perfect slices, and a hostess who greeted me not with a smile, but a curious, almost knowing tilt of her head. Her name tag caught my eye. Ivy. She had a way of looking right through you, as if she could replay your whole life just by glancing at your shoes. "Sit anywhere," she said. The cafe was quiet, except for the soft buzz of the fluorescent lights and the clink of silverware from behind the counter. There were a handful of customers, but their faces seemed vague and their clothes old-fashioned. A couple in buttoned cardigans, a pair of truckers with mugs in hand, a boy about my age who stared into his coffee as though it might tell his fortune. I took a booth by the window. When Ivy came by with a menu, I asked for coffee and fries. She nodded, still watching me too closely. "You on a long drive?" she asked. "Yes, Colorado," I replied. Her lips twitched in a not-quite smile. "You might want something stronger than coffee tonight." At the next table, snippets of conversation drifted my way. Last time it was the storm kept them here. And can't always choose when the clock moves. The fry cook behind the counter was flipping a single pancake over and over, never plating it, just flipping, his eyes darting to the clock. My phone had no signal. The Wi-Fi password wasn't posted anywhere, and when I asked, Ivy simply said, "Never works this late." I realized no one else had a phone on the table either. My food came, but the fries tasted strange. Salty, sure, but with a hint of something metallic. The coffee, however, was the best I'd had in months, almost comforting. But every time I glanced at the windows, all I saw was the reflection of the room behind me. The highway, the lot, my own Nissan, gone, replaced by only darkness and cold glass. After what felt like an hour, but could have been 4 minutes, I tried to pay my bill. The check had prices that made no sense. 20-cent coffee, a burger for $1. The receipt was dated March 18th, 1987. When I looked up, Ivy was gone, and a different woman in the same uniform stood by the register. Her name tag wasn't a printed tag, but a piece of masking tape with a name written in faded ballpoint ink. Beth. I tried to protest. "I think there's a mistake. I stopped in 2022. She shook her head minutely. "It's always 1987 on a Thursday here. Out past the crossroads, sometimes time gets mixed. Something in her eyes pleaded with me, as though she wanted to tell me more, but couldn't. With an increasing sense of panic, I pushed out the front door, only to find the lot empty. My car, the battered pickup, even the rigs, gone. The sign's lights flickered and dimmed. I circled around back, searching for anyone, any sound. The landscape had changed. Behind the diner, instead of the wooded lot I'd seen on my way in, the land fell away into a swirling mist, and I heard distant music, old country, warped and dragging. As I ran inside, the air felt thicker, colder, my breath visible. Every step seemed to echo. The customers sat silent, watching me, their eyes dark. Beth approached again, her voice tremulous. "Sometimes people stop here and don't continue. Some stay, some slip back out when the night thins. It all depends on the diner's mood. If it wants to keep you, it will desperate." I tried the kitchen. The cook was gone, the grill cold, but an exit sign glowed above a heavy back door. I bolted through it, stumbling out into a maze of hallways lined with faded black and white photographs. Faces that looked eerily familiar, like school pictures from yearbooks where the names are on the tip of your tongue, but out of reach. I kept moving, turning left, then right, the passage tightening, the air humming with electric anxiety, until finally a surge of fear drove me through a final door. And suddenly, I was outside, under blue morning light, standing next to my Nissan in the motel lot where I'd planned to spend the night. My receipt from the diner lay crumpled on the passenger seat, dated still from 1987. A greasy coffee ring circled around my own name. The digital clock read exactly the time I'd left the highway several hours earlier. For days, I saw that place in my dreams. Ivy and Beth, the silent customers, that looping hallway, the mist beyond the windows. I called friends, checked maps, even tried to find Eve's 24-hour diner on the internet. There's no record it ever existed at exit 72, and every local I quizzed just shrugged. I can't explain what happened, and each time I tell the story, the details shift. Sometimes it was raining, sometimes it was snowing, sometimes I was alone. But when I check my glove box, the receipt is always there. A dirty slip of paper that smells of coffee, nostalgia, and a night that can't quite let me go. I avoid late-night highway diners now. And if you ever find yourself on I-44 at 2:17 a.m., running low on gas, think twice before stopping at a place that feels just a bit too old, too quiet, too ready for you to come inside. Sometimes the past is hungrier than the future. And sometimes, if the diner wants you, it keeps you, forever anchored at a crossroads nobody else can see. Let's move to our sixth story. My name is David, and I'm a 39-year-old father of two from Atlanta, Georgia. What I'm about to tell you happened during our family vacation in July 2019. When my wife, Karen, and I decided to drive our kids to Disney World instead of flying. It was supposed to be a fun adventure, a chance to see America with 8-year-old Emma and 5-year-old Tyler in our brand new Honda Odyssey. But what started as a dream family road trip turned into the most terrifying night of our lives somewhere along Interstate 75 in rural Georgia. And it taught me that the most dangerous predators on American highways aren't wild animals. They're other human beings who see a family van as nothing more than easy prey. We left Atlanta early Saturday morning, planning to take our time and make it a leisurely 2-day drive with an overnight stop in Gainesville, Florida. The kids were excited, tablets charged, snacks packed, and Karen had mapped out interesting stops along the way. For the first few hours, everything was perfect. We played road trip games, sang along to Disney songs, and stopped at a roadside peach stand in Macon, where Tyler got his face sticky with juice and Emma complained about the heat. It felt like the kind of family memory we'd look back on fondly for years. The trouble started around 6 p.m., just south of Tifton, when we pulled off I-75 to get gas and dinner. It was one of those typical highway exits with a cluster of fast food restaurants and gas stations, nothing that should have raised any red flags. While Karen took the kids to the restroom at McDonald's, I filled up the tank and checked our route. That's when I noticed a woman standing by a beat-up sedan near the edge of the parking lot, waving frantically at passing cars. She looked to be in her 30s, disheveled, with stringy blonde hair and clothes that had seen better days. When she saw me looking, she started walking toward our van, calling out, "Please, sir, can you help me? My car broke down and I need to get to the hospital. My little girl is sick." She was holding what looked like a small child wrapped in a blanket, though something about the way she carried it seemed off. Every instinct I had told me something was wrong. Maybe it was the way her eyes kept darting around the parking lot, or how she seemed to be positioning herself between me and the van. But I felt that primal parental warning that kicks in when you sense danger to your family. I told her I was sorry, but suggested she call 911 or ask inside the McDonald's for help. Her demeanor changed instantly. The desperate mother act dropped, and her face hardened. "You sure you can't help?" she asked. And I noticed she'd moved closer to the van's sliding door. Nice family you got there. Hate for anything to happen to them. The bundle in her arms shifted, and I realized it wasn't a child at all. It was something else wrapped in a baby blanket. Maybe to make her story more convincing. That's when I saw the man approaching from behind the gas station. He was tall, maybe 40 years old, wearing a baseball cap pulled low over his face. He wasn't walking like a normal customer. He was moving with purpose, his eyes fixed on our van. Another man emerged from behind a pickup truck parked near the road, younger but with the same predatory focus. I backed toward the McDonald's entrance, my heart pounding. Through the windows, I could see Karen and the kids at a table, Emma helping Tyler with his Happy Meal. They looked so innocent, so vulnerable, completely unaware that we were being targeted by what I now realized was a coordinated team of predators. The woman followed me, still playing her part but with an edge of menace in her voice. "Come on, mister. Don't be like that. We just need a ride. Won't take long." Behind her, the two men had positioned themselves on either side of our van. One was peering through the windows, taking inventory of our belongings, the laptop bag, Karen's purse, the kids' tablets, all the valuable items that mark a family as worth robbing. I pushed through the McDonald's door and went straight to Karen. "We need to leave. Now," I said quietly, trying not to alarm the kids, but making sure she understood the urgency. Karen took one look at my face and started gathering up the kids without asking questions. As we headed for the door, I could see the woman and two men regrouping near our van. "Daddy, what's wrong?" Emma asked, picking up on the tension. I told her everything was fine, that we just needed to get back on the road. But as we approached the van, the woman stepped directly into our path. "Well, look at this beautiful family," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "You sure you can't help a mother in need?" She looked directly at Emma and Tyler, and something in her expression made my skin crawl. Such pretty children. Bet they'd be worth a lot to the right people. That's when I knew we weren't just dealing with simple robbery. These people were talking about something much worse. Human trafficking, kidnapping, the kind of crimes you read about in the news and think could never happen to your family. Karen grabbed both kids and pulled them behind me, her face white with terror. "Get away from my family," I said, my voice louder than I intended. Other customers in the parking lot started looking our way, which seemed to make the predators nervous. The two men stepped back slightly, but the woman held her ground. "No need to make a scene," she said. "Just get in your van and drive to the truck stop 5 miles south. We'll follow you. Make this easy on everyone, especially the little ones." I pulled out my cell phone and started dialing 911. "I'm calling the police," I announced loudly enough for other people to hear. "This woman and two men are threatening my family and trying to force us to go with them." The effect was immediate. The woman stepped back, cursing under her breath, and the two men started, walking quickly toward their vehicles. But instead of leaving, they got in their cars and waited at the edge of the parking lot. They weren't giving up. They were just changing tactics. The police arrived within 10 minutes, but by then, the predators were gone. The officer who took our statement said this wasn't the first report of this type of activity along I-75. "They target families," he explained. "Look for out-of-state plates, nice vehicles, people who look like they have money. Usually they try to get you to an isolated location where they can rob you, steal your vehicle, or worse." He recommended we not travel after dark and suggested we stay in a hotel in town instead of continuing south. "These groups are organized," he said. "They communicate with each other, share information about potential targets. If you keep driving tonight, you might run into their associates down the road. We spent the night at a Hampton Inn in Tifton, all four of us sleeping in one room with the door double locked and the security chain engaged. The kids thought it was an adventure, but Karen and I barely slept. Every sound in the hallway made us jump. Every car door slamming in the parking lot sent us to the window to check. The next morning, we drove straight to Disney World without any more stops, arriving exhausted and shaken, but safe. The vacation was wonderful, but it was overshadowed by what had happened. Emma asked repeatedly why those people had been so mean, and Tyler had nightmares about strangers trying to take him away from us. We drove home on I-95 instead of I-75, and we've never taken another family road trip since then. It's not that we're living in fear, but we've learned that the highways can be hunting grounds for predators who see families as opportunities. What should have been a joyful memory became a lesson in how quickly a normal situation can turn dangerous when you're dealing with people who have no conscience, no empathy, and no regard for the innocence of children. The most chilling part is knowing that if we hadn't been in a public place, if I hadn't gotten suspicious early enough, or if other customers hadn't been around to witness what was happening, our family might have become another statistic. Missing persons. An abandoned van found days later in a remote location. Parents and children who simply disappeared while living their American dream of a family road trip. Now when I see families loading up their vehicles for vacation, I want to warn them. Be aware of your surroundings. Trust your instincts. Don't let anyone separate you from your vehicle or convince you to go to a secondary location. And remember that predators are sophisticated. They use women and children as bait. They work in teams, and they're very good at identifying and isolating vulnerable targets. The highway system that connects our country and makes family adventures possible is also used by people who prey on families. They're out there right now, watching for the next van full of tourists, the next parents who might be too trusting, too naive, or too distracted to recognize danger until it's too late. We were lucky. Not every family is. Let's move to our seventh story. My name is Miguel, and I'm a 31-year-old long-haul trucker who's been driving Interstate 10 through New Mexico for 8 years. When people ask me about the strangest thing I've ever seen on the road, they expect stories about drunk drivers, crazy weather, or maybe some wildlife. But what happened to me on a cold February night in 2020, somewhere between Lordsburg and Deming, still makes me question everything I thought I knew about what travels our highways after midnight. I've been driving trucks since I was 22, logged over 1 million miles without a single accident, and I've always prided myself on being practical, observant, and completely grounded in reality. That night changed all of that. I was hauling a load of electronics from Phoenix to Houston in my 2018 Peterbilt 579, running about 2 hours behind schedule because of a delay at the loading dock. The company dispatcher had been on my case all day about making up time, so I was pushing through the night instead of taking my usual rest break in Tucson. It was one of those crystal-clear desert nights where you can see every star in the sky, temperature hovering just above freezing, with that bone-dry air that makes every sound carry for miles. Around 1:30 a.m., I was approaching the Lordsburg area on I-10 westbound when I caught sight of something unusual in my mirrors. Another semi was coming up behind me, but there was something off about it that made me take a closer look. The truck appeared to be an old Peterbilt, maybe from the 1950s or early 1960s, with those classic rounded fenders and the distinctive grille design that they don't make anymore. Even from a distance, I could tell it was pristine, like it had just rolled off the showroom floor 60 years ago. Now, I've been to plenty of truck shows and classic vehicle meets, so seeing a restored vintage truck isn't necessarily strange. But this one was hauling a trailer and moving at highway speed on a major interstate in the middle of the night. Most people who own trucks that valuable don't risk them on long hauls, and they certainly don't drive them through the desert at 2 a.m. when it's too dark to appreciate the restoration work. As the truck got closer, I could make out more details that didn't add up. The headlights had that warm, yellowish glow of old incandescent bulbs, not the bright white of modern LEDs or even halogen lights. The chrome was so polished it seemed to glow in my mirrors, and I could see vintage mud flaps with those classic pin-up girl silhouettes that truckers used to favor back in the day. Everything about this truck screamed authenticity, down to the last rivet and running light. But here's where it gets weird. The truck was moving at exactly 75 miles per hour, keeping perfect pace with me. But I never heard it on my CB radio. In the trucking world, drivers usually announce themselves, especially when passing or following closely. We chat about road conditions, traffic, speed traps, weather. It's part of the culture. But my CB was silent, except for the occasional chatter from other drivers miles away. The vintage Peterbilt pulled into the left lane to pass, and that's when I got my first good look at the cab. The driver was wearing what looked like a 1950s-era trucker outfit, a baseball cap, white t-shirt, and a leather jacket. Even his profile looked like something from an old photograph, with that clean-cut, square-jawed appearance that men had back then. He never looked over at me, just kept his eyes fixed straight ahead with the kind of concentration you see in drivers who've been on the road for decades. As he passed, I noticed something that made my skin crawl. The trailer he was pulling had no visible license plate, no dot numbers, no company markings of any kind. In the trucking industry, that's impossible. Every commercial vehicle has to display identification, registration numbers, safety ratings. But this trailer was completely unmarked, just plain white with that slightly rounded design they used in the mid-20th century. The truck pulled ahead of me and took the right lane again, maintaining that perfect 75 miles per hour speed. I tried raising him on the CB, calling out his position and asking for a radio check. Nothing. I switched channels, tried different approaches. Still nothing. It was like the truck was invisible to radio waves, which shouldn't be possible with modern CB equipment. That's when I started paying attention to how other vehicles on the road were reacting to the vintage truck. A car that had been following me for miles suddenly swerved hard to the left, tires squealing, as if trying to avoid something. But from my perspective, there was nothing there except the Peterbilt, which was driving normally in the right lane. The car's driver looked panicked, fighting to maintain control, and I watched him fishtail before finally straightening out and speeding away as fast as his little sedan would go. A few minutes later, a motorcycle that had been approaching from behind suddenly slowed down dramatically, pulling off at the next exit without any warning. Through my passenger side mirror, I could see the rider looking back over his shoulder, with what appeared to be terror on his face, even though the vintage truck hadn't done anything threatening. I started to wonder if other drivers were seeing something I wasn't, or if they were seeing nothing at all where I saw the truck. The possibility that I was experiencing some kind of hallucination crossed my mind, but the truck was too detailed, too consistent, too real-looking to be a product of fatigue or caffeine withdrawal. As we approached the Aquila Flats area, the vintage Peterbilt suddenly slowed down and took exit 102, the off-ramp that leads to an old abandoned truck stop that's been closed for at least 15 years. I knew the truck stop well. It used to be a popular place for drivers to rest, get fuel, and grab a meal back in the day. But it had been shuttered since around 2005, and the last time I'd seen it, the pumps were removed and the building was deteriorating. Curiosity got the better of me. I decided to follow the truck partly to solve the mystery and partly because I was genuinely concerned that someone might be lost or in trouble. I took the same exit and followed the access road toward where the old truck stop used to be. What I found there defied everything I thought I knew about reality. The truck stop was fully operational, exactly as it had looked 20 years earlier. The pumps were working, the neon signs were bright. The parking lot was filled with trucks from the 1940s, 50s, and 60s. Drivers in period clothing were walking around, fueling up, checking their loads, talking in small groups like it was just another night at a busy truck stop. I parked my Peterbilt at the edge of the lot and sat there for a few minutes, trying to process what I was seeing. Everything looked real, solid, three-dimensional. I could hear the rumble of diesel engines, the hiss of air brakes, conversations in the distance. The smell of diesel fuel and cigarette smoke drifted through my open window. But when I pulled out my cell phone to take pictures or call someone, the screen showed no signal and the camera wouldn't function. The device was completely dead, even though it had been working fine just minutes earlier on the interstate. I watched as the driver of the vintage Peterbilt I'd been following got out of his cab and walked toward the truck stop restaurant. He moved with the easy, confident gait of someone who belonged there, nodding to other drivers as he passed. Up close, he looked exactly like he'd stepped out of a 1950s trucker magazine. Clean-shaven, wearing perfectly pressed clothes, with that earnest, hard-working demeanor that seemed to characterize men of that era. As I sat there watching this impossible scene, I noticed that none of the vintage trucks had modern safety equipment. No GPS antennas, no satellite radio gear, no electronic logging devices. Their exhaust stacks weren't equipped with the pollution control systems that have been mandatory for decades. Everything about these vehicles suggested they were exactly what they appeared to be: trucks from another time. The strangest part came when I tried to get out of my cab to investigate further. As soon as I opened my door, the entire scene began to fade, like a photograph that's been overexposed to sunlight. The lights dimmed, the sounds grew distant, and the trucks and people became translucent. Within seconds, I was looking at the familiar sight of the abandoned, deteriorating truck stop I'd known for years. I sat there until dawn, trying to convince myself that I'd experienced some kind of hallucination brought on by fatigue, caffeine, or the isolation of long-distance driving. But when I finally started my engine and pulled back onto I-10, my CB radio crackled to life with a message that froze my blood. "Thanks for the company tonight, driver. See you on the flip side." The voice was clear, friendly, and had the distinctive accent and terminology that truckers used back in the 1950s. But when I looked around, there wasn't another truck in sight for miles in either direction. I've driven that stretch of I-10 dozens of times since that night, and I've never seen the vintage Peterbilt again. But other truckers have told me similar stories. Ghost trucks from bygone eras, phantom drivers who appear and disappear without warning, and an old truck stopped near Lordsburg that sometimes comes back to life for travelers who need to remember that the highways we drive today are built on the dreams and memories of the drivers who came before us. I still don't know if what I experienced was real, supernatural, or just the product of a tired mind playing tricks on itself. But I do know that the next time I see something impossible on the road, I'm going to trust my eyes and my experience. Sometimes the most unbelievable stories are the ones that teach us the most about the mysterious world we live in, and the highways that connect us all across time and space. Let's move to our 8th story. My name is Linda, and I'm a 46-year-old registered nurse from Kansas City, Kansas. What I experienced during a tornado warning in May 2021 while driving through rural Kansas challenged everything I thought I knew about human nature and survival instincts. As a healthcare professional, I've seen people at their absolute worst and their absolute best during medical emergencies. But nothing prepared me for what I discovered about the darkness that can emerge when people think they're completely isolated from the outside world. It was a Tuesday evening when I was driving home from a medical conference in Garden City, taking Highway 50 east through some of the most remote farmland in western Kansas. The conference had run late, and I didn't leave Garden City until almost 7 p.m., which meant I'd be driving through the night to get back to Kansas City. I'd made this drive dozens of times over the years for various medical training sessions, and I was comfortable with the route even in the dark. My Honda Accord was reliable, I had plenty of gas, and the weather forecast had only mentioned a slight chance of storms. But as anyone who lives in Kansas knows, weather can change dramatically in the span of an hour, especially during tornado season. Around 9:30 p.m., just west of Dodge City, I started noticing the classic signs of severe weather developing. The temperature had dropped at least 15 degrees in the past half hour. The wind was picking up, and I could see lightning flickering in the clouds to the southwest. My phone's emergency alert system started going off with tornado watches and warnings for several counties along my route. As a Kansas native, I know better than to ignore these warnings, especially when I'm driving alone through rural areas where there might not be adequate shelter. The safest thing to do was to find a sturdy building and wait out the storm. But the problem with that stretch of Highway 50 is that there aren't many options. It's mostly farmland with scattered ranch houses, grain elevators, and the occasional gas station. When I saw the brown highway sign indicating a roadside rest area 2 miles ahead, I decided that would be my best bet for shelter, even if it wasn't ideal. The rest area was typical for rural Kansas. A small brick building with restrooms, a few picnic tables under a pavilion, and a parking area that could accommodate maybe 20 vehicles. What made me immediately uncomfortable was that there were already several vehicles there. A large pickup truck with Oklahoma plates, a sedan with Missouri tags, and an older SUV that looked like it had seen better days. Given the severe weather warnings, it made sense that other travelers had the same idea about seeking shelter. But something about the way the vehicles were positioned, almost like they were trying to block the exit, made me hesitate. I parked near the building and hurried inside just as the first fat raindrops started falling. The storm was moving in fast, and I could hear thunder getting closer by the minute. Inside the small building, I found 5 other people who'd apparently taken shelter there. A family of 3, mother, father, and a teenage daughter, and 2 men who appeared to be traveling together. Everyone seemed nervous about the weather, checking their phones for updates and listening to the wind howling outside. The family introduced themselves as the Hendersons, traveling from Oklahoma City to visit relatives in Topeka. The mother, Carol, seemed genuinely worried about her daughter's safety, while the father, Frank, kept checking the weather radar on his phone. Their daughter, who looked to be about 16, stayed close to her parents and barely spoke. The 2 men said they were construction workers heading to a job site in Kansas City. But something about their story didn't quite add up. Their clothes were too clean, their hands too soft, and they seemed more interested in watching the family than in checking the weather. As the storm intensified, we all huddled in the small building listening to the wind and rain. The lights flickered a few times, and we could hear what sounded like hail hitting the roof. The weather radio that someone had brought was crackling with reports of funnel clouds spotted in the area, and we all agreed that staying put was definitely the right decision. That's when things started to feel wrong. One of the construction workers, who'd introduced himself as Pete, began asking the Henderson family very specific questions about their travel plans, where they were staying in Topeka, whether anyone was expecting them at a particular time. At first, it seemed like normal small talk between stranded travelers. But I started noticing that his partner, Lou, was paying very close attention to the answers and occasionally stepping outside to check something in their vehicle. As a nurse, I've developed pretty good instincts about people, and both Pete and Lou were setting off alarm bells in my head. The way they looked at the teenage daughter was making me uncomfortable, and I noticed they kept positioning themselves between the Henderson family and the door. When Frank Henderson tried to step outside to check on their car, Pete quickly suggested it wasn't safe and physically blocked his path. That's when I realized what was happening. These weren't construction workers taking shelter from a storm. They were predators who'd been using the rest area as a hunting ground, waiting for isolated families to stop there during bad weather. The storm was just providing them with perfect cover. No witnesses, no traffic, and victims who couldn't leave because of the dangerous conditions outside. I excused myself to use the restroom, but instead of going into the women's room, I slipped out the back door of the building and circled around to check their vehicle. What I found confirmed my worst fears. Through the back window of their SUV, I could see rope, duct tape, plastic zip ties, and what looked like a taser. This wasn't random. They'd come prepared to abduct people. I had to make a decision quickly. I could try to call 911, but cell service was spotty, and the nearest law enforcement was probably 30 minutes away at best. I could try to warn the Henderson family directly, but that would tip off Pete and Lou and possibly trigger a violent confrontation in the confined space of the building. Or I could try to create a distraction that would give the family a chance to escape. As a healthcare professional, I'm trained to stay calm in crisis situations and make quick decisions when lives are at stake. I decided to use my medical knowledge and training to my advantage. I went back inside and announced loudly that I was a registered nurse and that I was concerned about potential carbon monoxide poisoning from the building's heating system. I insisted that everyone needed to get to their vehicles immediately, despite the storm, because staying inside could be deadly. Frank Henderson immediately moved toward the door with his family, understanding the urgency in my voice even if he didn't fully grasp what was happening. But Pete stepped in front of them again, this time more aggressively. "The nurse is overreacting," he said. "We're safer inside than out there in that storm." That's when I played my final card. I pulled out my phone and announced that I was calling emergency services to report a possible gas leak and potential carbon monoxide exposure. "They'll need to evacuate this entire area and send hazmat teams," I said loudly. "Everyone's going to be answering questions and giving statements once the authorities arrive." The effect was immediate. Pete and Lou exchanged a look, and I could see them calculating whether their plan was worth the risk of law enforcement involvement. While they were distracted, I grabbed the Henderson family and pushed them toward the door. "Follow me to my car right now," I whispered urgently to Carol Henderson. These men are not who they claim to be. We all made it outside into the storm, which had actually started to weaken. I told the Hendersons to get in their car and follow me, and we both left the rest area immediately, despite the weather. In my rearview mirror, I could see Pete and Lou standing in the doorway, watching us leave but not pursuing. I followed the Henderson family to a well-lit truck stop in Dodge City, where we called the Kansas State Police and reported what had happened. The troopers took our statement seriously and said they'd investigate the rest area. But when they went back there an hour later, Pete and Lou were gone. The worst part is that this wasn't an isolated incident. The state trooper told us that there had been several reports over the past 2 years of suspicious activity at remote rest areas during severe weather events. Predators were specifically targeting these locations because they knew that families with children would be likely to stop there during storms, creating perfect opportunities for abduction attempts. The Henderson family sent me a card a few weeks later, thanking me for potentially saving their lives. But I still wake up sometimes thinking about what might have happened if I hadn't trusted my instincts, if I dismissed my concerns as paranoia, or if I hadn't been there at all. How many other families have stopped at isolated rest areas during storms and encountered people who saw the bad weather as an opportunity rather than a threat? As a nurse, I've always believed that most people are fundamentally good and that they'll help each other in times of crisis. But that night taught me that there are predators who specifically look for vulnerable people in vulnerable situations. They use natural disasters, severe weather, and isolated locations as tools to find and trap victims who have nowhere to run and no one to help them. Now, when I'm driving alone, especially during severe weather, I'm much more careful about where I stop and who I trust. I carry pepper spray. I tell people exactly where I'm going and when I expect to arrive. And I never assume that someone who claims to be seeking shelter from a storm has innocent intentions. The highways that connect our communities can also be used by people who prey on the kindness and trust of travelers. And sometimes the most dangerous storms are the ones that bring out the worst in human nature. Let's move to our 9th story. My name is Chris, and I'm a 26-year-old software developer from Charlotte, North Carolina. What I'm about to tell you defies everything I know about technology, consciousness, and the nature of reality itself. In March 2022, I was driving from Charlotte to Atlanta to visit my girlfriend Madison, who just started a new job there. It was supposed to be a simple weekend trip, something I'd done dozens of times before in my Tesla Model 3. I pride myself on being logical, analytical, someone who believes in data and evidence over superstition and folk tales. But what happened to me on Interstate 95 that night challenged every assumption I had about how the world works. And it left me with evidence that I still can't explain. I left Charlotte around 11 p.m. on a Friday night, planning to drive through the night and arrive at Madison's apartment Saturday morning. The route was familiar. I-77 south to Columbia, then I-20 west to Atlanta. My Tesla was only 6 months old, equipped with all the latest technology including autopilot, a dash cam that recorded everything, and enough battery power to make the trip without charging. As a software developer, I appreciate good engineering, and the Tesla represented everything I loved about modern technology: precision, reliability, and constant data collection that could help improve performance. The first couple hours of the drive were completely normal. Light traffic, clear weather, my Spotify playlist keeping me alert. Around 1 a.m., somewhere between Florence and Columbia, I started feeling drowsy despite the caffeine I'd consumed before leaving. That's when I decided to engage the autopilot feature and let the car handle the driving while I remained alert and ready to take control if needed. It's not full self-driving. You're supposed to keep your hands on the wheel and pay attention. But it does help reduce fatigue on long highway stretches. That's when things started getting weird. According to my dashboard display, I was maintaining exactly 75 miles per hour in the right lane. But something felt off about the drive. The landscape outside seemed to be repeating itself. The same billboards, the same exit signs, the same clusters of trees. At first, I thought it was just the monotony of highway driving playing tricks on my tired mind. But when I passed the same south-of-the-border billboard for the 4th time in 30 minutes, I knew something was seriously wrong. I disengaged autopilot and took manual control of the vehicle, checking my GPS location. According to both the car's navigation system and my phone, I was making normal progress toward Atlanta, currently somewhere near Sumter, South Carolina. But I distinctly remembered passing the Sumter exit over an hour earlier. Either my memory was completely failing me, or something was interfering with my perception of time and distance. That's when I noticed something even more disturbing. My dash cam, which continuously records video of the road ahead and behind, was showing a timestamp that didn't match any of my other devices. The camera thought it was 11:47 p.m., but my phone, the car's main display, and my watch all showed 2:15 a.m. That's a discrepancy of over 2 hours, and there's no technical reason why those systems should disagree about something as basic as the current time. I pulled over at the next rest area to try to figure out what was happening. When I reviewed the dashcam footage from the past hour, what I saw made my blood run cold. The video showed me driving normally, hands on the wheel, eyes on the road. But I had no memory of most of what the camera had recorded. According to the footage, I'd taken 3 different exits, driven through small towns, stopped at a gas station, and even had a conversation with someone outside my car window. None of it looked familiar, and I had no recollection of any of those events. But the most terrifying part was watching myself in the videos. My facial expressions, my body language, even the way I moved. It all looked like me, but somehow different. It was as if someone else was controlling my actions while I was experiencing a completely different version of the same time period. In the footage, I appeared calm and purposeful, making deliberate choices about where to drive and what to do. But in my memory, I'd been on autopilot on a straight highway stretch. I tried calling Madison to explain that I might be having some kind of medical emergency. But when I looked at my phone's call log, it showed that I'd already called her 3 times in the past 2 hours. The last call, according to the log, had lasted 18 minutes and ended just 20 minutes ago. I had no memory of making any of those calls. When I listened to the voicemails I'd apparently left for myself during this lost time, my own voice told me things I didn't remember learning. In one message, I calmly explained that I'd taken a detour to avoid an accident, stopped to help another driver with car trouble, and was running about an hour behind schedule. The voice sounded exactly like me, used words and phrases I would use, but I had no memory of recording it. As a software developer, my first instinct was to look for logical explanations. Maybe I was having micro-sleep episodes, brief periods of unconsciousness that can happen during monotonous highway driving. Maybe the stress of my job and relationship had triggered some kind of dissociative episode. Maybe there was a carbon monoxide leak in the car affecting my consciousness. But none of those explanations accounted for the technical discrepancies in the timestamp data or the detailed evidence of activities I couldn't remember. I decided to continue driving toward Atlanta, but this time I stayed fully alert and avoided using any automated features. I kept both hands on the wheel, the radio turned up loud, and I pulled over every 30 minutes to check the time on multiple devices. But even with these precautions, I continued to experience episodes where my memory and the digital evidence didn't match. At one point, I watched myself in the rearview mirror, having an animated conversation with someone. But I was alone in the car and hadn't been speaking out loud. The dash cam recorded me pulling into a McDonald's parking lot, getting out of the car and walking inside. But I remembered driving straight past that exit without stopping. When I checked the McDonald's receipt that was apparently in my pocket, it showed a purchase I didn't remember making at a time when I thought I was still on the highway. The most disturbing incident happened around 4 a.m., when I found myself parked at a truck stop with no memory of how I'd gotten there. The dash cam showed me driving there deliberately, parking in a specific spot, and sitting in the car for over an hour. During that hour, The footage showed me typing extensively on my laptop, which was strange because I'd left my laptop at home in Charlotte. But there it was in the video. Me working intently on a laptop that I didn't own, typing code for a project I'd never seen before. When I checked my car's internet usage logs, they showed massive data uploads during that hour. Gigabytes of information being transmitted to servers I didn't recognize. As someone who works in cybersecurity, I knew this wasn't normal behavior for a car's system. Tesla vehicles do transmit data for software updates and diagnostic purposes, but not in these quantities and not to unrecognized servers. I finally made it to Madison's apartment around 8 a.m. Saturday morning, nearly 5 hours later than planned, and with no clear explanation for where the time had gone. When she asked about my trip, I tried to tell her what had happened, but the story sounded insane, even to me. She suggested I see a doctor, worried that I might have had a seizure or some other medical event that could affect memory formation. But when we reviewed all the digital evidence together, the dash cam footage, the call logs, the internet usage data, the receipts from places I didn't remember visiting, Madison became genuinely frightened. As a data analyst, she understood how difficult it would be to falsify all of this information, and she could see that I was genuinely confused and scared by what had happened. The most chilling discovery came when we examined the code I'd apparently written during that lost hour at the truck stop. It was sophisticated software that I didn't recognize, written in programming languages I barely knew, designed to interface with vehicle control systems in ways that shouldn't be possible with consumer hardware. The code was better than anything I could have written, using techniques and algorithms that were beyond my current skill level. Over the following weeks, I tried to research similar experiences, looking for medical explanations or documented cases of highway hypnosis that could account for such detailed memory gaps. What I found instead were scattered reports from other drivers about similar episodes. Periods of missing time on long highway drives, accompanied by digital evidence of activities they couldn't remember. Most of these reports were dismissed as fatigue-induced hallucinations or attention lapses, but the technical details were too consistent to ignore. I've made the drive between Charlotte and Atlanta several times since then, but never again at night, and never alone. I've also disabled most of the automated features in my Tesla and switched to a simpler vehicle with minimal electronic systems. Whatever happened to me that night, whether it was some kind of medical condition, technology malfunction, or something else entirely, I don't want to experience it again. The scariest part isn't the missing time or the unexplained activities. It's the possibility that I wasn't in control of my own actions for several hours, and that something else, whether it was a malfunction in my brain, my car, or something more exotic, was making decisions and taking actions using my body and my resources. In our increasingly connected world, where vehicles are becoming more like computers on wheels, I can't help but wonder how many other drivers have experienced similar episodes without realizing it, and what might be happening during those lost hours on America's highways. Let's move to our 10th story. My name is Patricia, and I'm a 52-year-old high school English teacher from Denver, Colorado. What happened to me in October 2024, during what should have been a simple photography trip through the Rocky Mountains, still haunts my dreams and has fundamentally changed how I think about isolation, survival, and the thin line between civilization and wilderness. I've been teaching for over 20 years. I've chaperoned dozens of field trips, and I consider myself a practical, level-headed person who doesn't believe in ghost stories or urban legends. But sometimes reality presents you with situations that are far more terrifying than any fiction. I had taken a personal day from school to drive up to the $1 Million Highway, Colorado State Route 550 between Ouray and Silverton, to photograph the fall foliage at its peak. It was a Friday in mid-October, Perfect weather for mountain photography, with clear skies and those brilliant golden aspens that make Colorado famous. I'd made this drive many times over the years, always during the day and always with other people. But this time, I wanted to capture the solitude and majesty of the mountains without distractions. My Canon EOS camera had new lenses I was eager to test, and I'd planned several specific stops along the route where the light would be perfect. I left Denver around 6 a.m., planning to spend the whole day in the mountains and return before dark. The drive to Ouray takes about 6 hours from Denver, but I wasn't in a hurry. I stopped frequently to take photos, particularly around the Black Canyon of the Gunnison and through the San Juan National Forest. By the time I reached Ouray, it was already 2 p.m., which meant I'd have to be selective about my shots if I wanted to make it home safely before nightfall. The $1 Million Highway is one of the most beautiful and most dangerous roads in America. It's a narrow, winding mountain road with steep drop-offs, no guardrails in many sections, and weather that can change from perfect to deadly in a matter of minutes. The road climbs over Red Mountain Pass at an elevation of 11,018 feet. And even in October, snow and ice are constant threats. I'd driven it before, but always with experienced mountain drivers and never alone. Around 3:30 p.m., about halfway between Ouray and Silverton, I found the perfect spot for photographs. There was a small pull-out area with a stunning view of the valley below, and the afternoon light was hitting the aspens exactly the way I'd envisioned. I parked my Subaru Outback carefully, making sure it was completely off the roadway, and spent about 45 minutes taking what turned out to be some of the best photographs of my life. When I returned to my car, I discovered my first problem. The engine turned over but wouldn't start. As someone who's not mechanically inclined, I tried the obvious things. Checking if I was out of gas, making sure the battery connections were tight, waiting a few minutes and trying again. Nothing worked. My cell phone showed no signal, which wasn't surprising given our location deep in the mountains. But it meant I couldn't call for help. The sun was already starting to set behind the peaks, and the temperature was dropping rapidly. I knew that spending a night in my car at 10,000 feet in October could be life-threatening, especially if the weather turned bad. I had some snacks, a bottle of water, and a light jacket. But I wasn't prepared for an overnight mountain emergency. My options were limited. Stay with the car and hope someone would come along before I froze, or try to walk back toward Ouray to find help. I decided to try walking back down the highway, figuring that I might encounter other travelers or find a better cell phone signal at a lower elevation. I locked my car, took my phone and wallet, and started walking south toward Ouray. The highway was completely deserted. No cars, no motorcycles, no RVs. Just me, the empty road, and the vast silence of the Colorado mountains. After about an hour of walking, I was getting genuinely worried. The temperature was dropping fast, my light jacket wasn't adequate for the conditions, and I hadn't seen a single vehicle. Worse, I was starting to feel the effects of altitude and exertion, shortness of breath, mild dizziness, and a headache that was getting worse. That's when I saw the cabin. It was set back from the road about 100 yards, barely visible through the trees. Smoke was rising from the chimney, and I could see lights in the windows. It looked like exactly the kind of rustic mountain retreat that wealthy people from Denver build as vacation homes. I didn't want to intrude on someone's privacy, but I was facing a potentially life-threatening situation, and I hoped they'd be willing to let me use their phone, or at least give me shelter until morning. The path to the cabin was well maintained, with split-rail fencing and landscaping that suggested money and attention to detail. As I got closer, I could see that it was a beautiful log home, probably built within the last decade, with all the modern amenities you'd expect. There were solar panels on the roof, a satellite dish, and what looked like a generator shed. Someone had invested serious money in making this place comfortable and self-sufficient. I knocked on the front door and waited. After a minute, I heard footsteps, and the door opened to reveal a woman who appeared to be in her 60s. She was well-dressed in expensive outdoor wear, with perfectly styled gray hair and the kind of confident bearing that comes from wealth and education. She looked exactly like someone who would own a mountain retreat like this. "I'm so sorry to bother you," I began, explaining about my car trouble and my need to contact someone for help. She listened sympathetically and immediately invited me inside, insisting that I warm up by the fire and have some hot coffee while we figured out how to get me back to civilization. The interior of the cabin was even more impressive than the exterior. High-end furnishings, Native American artwork, a stone fireplace that dominated the main room, and floor-to-ceiling windows that showcased the mountain views. Everything spoke of taste, money, and sophistication. The woman, who introduced herself as Meredith, seemed like exactly the kind of person who would create such a space, cultured, well-traveled, someone who appreciated both luxury and natural beauty. Meredith was incredibly kind and helpful. She gave me coffee, offered me food, and tried her landline phone to call for a tow truck. The phone worked, but she discovered that no towing services were available until morning because of the remote location and the late hour. She insisted that I stay the night, saying it would be dangerous for me to try to walk back to my car in the dark, and that she had plenty of room. I was grateful for her hospitality, but as the evening wore on, I started noticing things that made me increasingly uncomfortable. The cabin was filled with personal photographs, but they were all of the same family, a man, woman, and 2 children, in various settings and at different ages. The photos looked like they spanned several decades, from the 1990s through the early 2020s. But Meredith didn't mention having a family, and I didn't see any signs that anyone else lived in the cabin. When I asked about the photos, Meredith's demeanor changed slightly. She became evasive, changing the subject or giving vague answers about old friends and people who used to visit. The more I looked around, the more I noticed that everything in the cabin seemed frozen in time. The magazines on the coffee table were from 2023, the kitchen calendar was set to October 2023, and even the food in the pantry had expiration dates from the previous year. The most unsettling discovery came when I used the bathroom and found prescription medications in the medicine cabinet. The labels were clearly visible, and they were all prescribed to someone named Meredith, but with a last name different from what she'd told me. More importantly, all the prescription dates were from 2023, over a year earlier. No medication would still be effective after that long, and certainly no one would keep expired prescriptions for that length of time. I started to suspect that Meredith wasn't who she claimed to be, or that something was seriously wrong with the situation I'd stumbled into. When I returned to the main room, I tried to engage her in conversation about current events, technology, anything that would help me gauge her connection to reality. Her responses were confused, contradictory, or simply didn't make sense. She talked about events from 2023 as if they were happening currently, mentioned planning to buy things that were no longer available, and seemed genuinely confused when I mentioned recent news or social media trends. As the evening progressed, Meredith's behavior became increasingly erratic. She would start sentences and not finish them, stare into space for long periods, or suddenly become agitated about things that weren't there. She began talking to people who weren't in the room, having entire conversations with invisible family members. At one point, she set the table for 4 people, insisting that her husband and children would be home soon, even though it was nearly midnight. I realized I was dealing with someone who was experiencing severe dementia or some other form of cognitive impairment. She was alone in a remote mountain cabin, possibly without any support system or regular contact with the outside world. But that raised even more questions. How was she surviving up there by herself? Who was maintaining the cabin? How was she getting food and supplies? And most importantly, was I safe staying there with someone whose grasp on reality was clearly compromised? Around 2 a.m., Meredith went to bed, leaving me alone in the main room with instructions to make yourself at home. I tried to sleep on the couch, but I was too concerned about my safety and too puzzled by the contradictions I'd observed. I spent the rest of the night looking through the cabin more carefully, trying to piece together what was really going on. What I found was even more disturbing. In a desk drawer, I discovered newspaper clippings about a car accident from October 2023. The headlines described a family of 4, parents and 2 teenage children, who had been killed when their vehicle went off the $1 million highway during an early snowstorm. The victims' names matched those on the prescription bottles and some of the mail I'd seen around the cabin. One of the victims was named Meredith. I also found legal documents indicating that the cabin had been inherited by a relative after the family's death, but that it had been sitting empty for months due to estate disputes and the remote location. According to the papers, no one was supposed to be living there, and the utilities had been shut off earlier in 2024. Yet the lights worked, the phone worked, and the place was warm and comfortable. When dawn finally came, I quietly let myself out of the cabin and walked back toward my car. I needed to get away from that place and figure out what I'd actually experienced. The morning light revealed something I hadn't noticed in the dark. My Subaru's engine started immediately, as if there had never been a problem. I drove straight to Ouray and called the Ouray County Sheriff's Department to report what I'd found. When the deputies investigated the cabin, they found it exactly as the legal documents described: empty, with utilities shut off, showing clear signs of having been abandoned for months. There were no recent signs of habitation, no food in the pantry, no personal belongings. The prescription bottles I'd seen were there, but they were covered in dust and clearly hadn't been disturbed in months. Most importantly, there was no woman named Meredith, no evidence that anyone had been living there, and no explanation for how I'd spent the night in a warm, well-lit, fully functional cabin that officially didn't exist. I still have the photographs I took that day. Beautiful shots of autumn in the Rockies. But I also have questions that may never be answered. Did I experience some kind of altitude-induced hallucination? Was my car trouble and the night at the cabin all in my imagination? Or did I somehow encounter the spirit of someone who died on that mountain road just a year earlier? Someone who was still trying to help stranded travelers the way she might have wanted someone to help her family on that snowy October night in 2023? I've never driven the $1 million highway alone since then, and I probably never will again. Some experiences change you in ways that can't be explained or rationalized away. Whether what happened was supernatural, psychological, or something else entirely, it taught me that the mountains hold secrets that we may never understand, and that sometimes the most beautiful places can also be the most mysterious. Let's move to our final story. My name is Jonathan, and I'm a 35-year-old paramedic from Spokane, Washington. In my 15 years of emergency medical work, I've seen every kind of trauma, tragedy, and human suffering imaginable. I thought nothing could shock me anymore. But what happened during a late-night ambulance call in January 2024 on Highway 2 through the Cascade Mountains challenged everything I believed about life, death, and the space between them. This is a story I've never told my supervisors, my colleagues, or even my wife, because I knew they'd never believe me. But after carrying this secret for almost 2 years, I need to share what I experienced on the loneliest stretch of road in Washington State. It was January 15th, 2024, around 11:30 p.m., and my partner Diego and I were responding to a motor vehicle accident reported on Highway 2 eastbound, about 30 miles past Stevens Pass. The caller had been driving through a snowstorm and claimed they'd seen a single vehicle rollover in a remote area with no cell towers or nearby buildings. The weather was brutal that night. Heavy snow, near zero visibility, and temperatures dropping to minus 15 degrees. Highway 2 through the Cascades is treacherous enough in good conditions, but during a January blizzard, it becomes one of the most dangerous roads in the Pacific Northwest. We'd been driving for over an hour through the storm, our ambulance's chains grinding against the icy asphalt. When we finally reached the coordinates the dispatcher had given us, what we found didn't match the description from the 911 call. Instead of a fresh rollover accident, we discovered an older sedan that had gone off the road and was partially buried in snow. The vehicle looked like it had been there for days, maybe weeks, not the recent accident we'd been called to investigate. Diego and I approached the car cautiously, our flashlights cutting through the swirling snow. The driver's side door was open, and we could see someone slumped over the steering wheel. As paramedics, we're trained to assess and treat patients quickly. But something about this scene felt wrong. The snow accumulation around the vehicle suggested it had been there much longer than tonight. Yet our dispatcher had insisted the 911 call had come in just 2 hours earlier. When I reached the driver, I found a woman who appeared to be in her 40s, wearing a winter coat and gloves. She was unconscious, but breathing, though her pulse was weak and her body temperature was dangerously low. Hypothermia was the immediate concern. But as I began my assessment, I noticed something that made my medical training kick into high alert. Her skin had the waxy, pale appearance of someone who'd been exposed to extreme cold for far longer than a few hours. Diego was checking the vehicle's interior while I worked on the patient. "Jonathan?" he called out, his voice tight with confusion. "You need to see this." Inside the car, he'd found a purse with identification showing the woman's name was Celeste, and according to her driver's license, she was 43 years old. But what disturbed Diego were the other items in the car. A cell phone that showed dozens of missed calls dating back 3 weeks, groceries that had clearly been purchased days earlier and had frozen solid, and most unsettling of all, a newspaper dated December 28th, 2023. "She's been here since before New Year's," Diego whispered, his breath visible in the frigid air. "But how is she still alive? And who called this in tonight?" We both looked around the empty highway, seeing nothing but snow-covered wilderness stretching in every direction. There were no other vehicles, no footprints, no sign that anyone else had been in this area recently. As I continued working to stabilize Celeste, something even stranger happened. She began to regain consciousness, her eyes fluttering open and focusing on my face. When she spoke, her voice was barely a whisper, but her words made my blood run cold. "You came," she said, as if she'd been expecting us. "I kept calling for help, but no one ever came. I've been waiting so long." I tried to explain that we were paramedics responding to a 911 call, but she shook her head weakly. "No, I called for help weeks ago, but my phone died. I've been trapped here, getting colder and colder, but I couldn't die. Something wouldn't let me die. Her eyes had an unusual clarity for someone suffering from severe hypothermia, and her vital signs, while weak, were far more stable than they should have been after weeks of exposure. Diego and I loaded Celeste into our ambulance and began the treacherous drive to the nearest hospital. During the 40-minute transport, she told us a story that defied medical explanation. She'd been driving home from visiting family in Seattle on December 27th when the blizzard hit. Her car had slid off the road in the exact spot where we'd found her, and she'd been unable to get cell service to call for help. The first few days were the worst, she explained as I monitored her vitals. I was so cold, so scared. I kept thinking I was going to freeze to death. But then something changed. The cold stopped hurting. I stopped feeling hungry or thirsty. It was like my body just paused. I could think clearly. I was aware of everything around me. But I wasn't dying the way I should have been. She described seeing other cars pass by occasionally, but somehow they never noticed her vehicle or stopped to help. She'd tried getting out to flag down passing traffic, but it was as if she was invisible to other drivers. I started to think I had died, she said, and that this was some kind of purgatory. Trapped forever on this highway, waiting for someone to find me. When we reached the hospital, the medical team was baffled by Celeste's condition. According to every medical textbook and protocol, someone couldn't survive 3 weeks of exposure to sub-freezing temperatures without food, water, or adequate shelter. Her body temperature was dangerously low, but not low enough to explain her survival. Her blood work showed signs of dehydration and malnutrition, but again, not severe enough for someone who'd been stranded that long. Dr. Morrison, the emergency physician on duty, pulled Diego and me aside after the initial assessment. "This doesn't make sense," she said, reviewing Celeste's chart. "The timeline you've described isn't medically possible. Human beings can survive maybe 3 to 5 days in those conditions, not 3 weeks. Yet her injuries and symptoms are consistent with prolonged exposure, and her story seems genuine." The mystery deepened when the hospital contacted Celeste's family. According to her sister, Celeste had been reported missing on December 28th after she failed to arrive home from her Seattle trip. Search and rescue teams had looked for her car along Highway 2 for several days, but hadn't found any trace of her or her vehicle. The search was eventually called off when heavy snow made the operation too dangerous. We drove that exact stretch of highway multiple times. The search coordinator told us when we followed up the next day. Our teams were specifically looking for a silver sedan matching her car's description. There's no way we could have missed it, especially with all the emergency equipment and personnel we had in that area. But the most disturbing revelation came when I returned to the accident scene the following day, during daylight hours. I wanted to see if there were any clues we'd missed in the dark and snow. What I found challenged everything I thought I knew about the incident. The spot where we discovered Celeste's car showed no signs of a vehicle having been there recently. No tire tracks, no disturbed snow patterns, no debris from an accident. I called Diego to meet me there, and we both searched the area thoroughly. There were no skid marks on the highway, no broken trees or damaged guardrails, nothing to indicate that a car had gone off the road in that location. It was as if the accident scene had been completely erased, or had never existed at all. The final piece of the puzzle came when we reviewed our ambulance's onboard GPS and camera systems. According to the digital records, we'd responded to a call at those coordinates, but the dashboard camera footage showed us loading an empty stretcher into the ambulance. There was no video evidence of Celeste, no record of the patient care we'd provided, and no documentation that we'd transported anyone to the hospital that night. Yet Celeste was real. She was recovering in the hospital, telling the same story to doctors, nurses, and investigators. Her family had visited her, grateful that she'd been found alive. But according to our equipment and digital systems, our rescue had never happened. Diego and I were questioned extensively by our supervisors, hospital administration, and even law enforcement. They wanted to understand how we could have patient care records for someone who didn't appear in any of our digital documentation. We stood by our story, but without video evidence or GPS records to corroborate our account, it became a medical mystery that no one could explain. Celeste made a full recovery and returned home to her family a week later. But she left behind questions that still haunt me almost 2 years later. How did she survive 3 weeks in conditions that should have killed her in days? Why didn't multiple search teams find her car when it was supposedly sitting in plain sight? And most importantly, how did Diego and I rescue someone who, according to our own equipment, never existed? I've continued working as a paramedic, responding to countless calls on Highway 2 and throughout the Cascades. But I've never forgotten that January night. And I've never stopped wondering if what we experienced was a glimpse into something beyond our normal understanding of life and death. Maybe there are spaces between the living and the dead where people can exist temporarily, waiting for the right moment or the right people to help them cross over. That's all for tonight's journey into the unknown. Thank you for joining me on Silent Fears as we explored 11 disturbing true stories from America's highways. These roads connect our communities, but they also hide secrets that remind us how thin the line can be between the familiar and the terrifying. If you have your own highway horror story, share it in the comments below. Until next time, drive safely, stay alert, and remember, you never know what you might encounter on the road ahead. This is Silent Fears, signing off.